A massive civilization once thrived where we see only untamed jungle. For centuries, the Amazon was dismissed as a green desert, a place where large societies could never take root. That story is now completely wrong. By the end of this video, you will understand how a lost network of cities, hidden for centuries, is forcing us to rewrite the history of the Americas. How did an ancient people build urban centers to rival medieval Europe without stone or metal? And why did their world vanish so completely that we forgot it existed? What does it mean to look at a wilderness and realize it is actually a garden? This belief in an empty Amazon was not just a theory, it became a foundational story. For generations, explorers, anthropologists, and even conservationists looked at that immense green sea and saw a pristine wilderness untouched by large-scale human hands. They called it a green desert, a place where the soil was so acidic and poor that only small, nomadic tribes could ever scrape out a living. This idea was powerfully shaped by the very first European accounts from the 16th century, which often described a land of scattered villages and endless, hostile jungle. The narrative was simple and persistent. The pre-Columbian Amazon was a place of isolation, not of kingdoms, a landscape that resisted civilization rather than nurturing it. This empty Amazon theory did more than just fill history books. It influenced real-world policies, guiding how governments protected the rainforest and how the world understood its past. But every great discovery begins with a crack in the old story. The first clues that this narrative was wrong did not come from satellites or archaeologists with shovels. They came from the living memory of the forest's own people, knowledge passed down for generations, waiting for the right moment to meet the gaze of modern science. These whispers from the soil were the first quiet calls for us to listen more closely. Archaeologists walking through seemingly untouched forest began to see the ground itself telling a different story. Scattered across the landscape were patches of earth so dark and rich they stood out starkly against the region's typical, pale, nutrient-poor soil. The local communities had a name for it, terra preta, or black earth. To the scientific eye, this was no accident of nature. This soil was a technological artifact, a living archive of human habitation. It was created intentionally, through a sophisticated process of adding charcoal from controlled burns, food waste, pottery shards, and compost over generations. This wasn't just dirt, it was a recipe for fertility engineered to last for centuries, even millennia. While the surrounding forest struggled in thin soil, these dark earth islands burst with life, supporting fruit trees and crops long after their makers had gone. This was the first physical evidence that people weren't just passing through, they were settling down and changing the very foundation of the land to support their future. Alongside this, the oral histories shared by indigenous guides added a crucial layer of meaning. They spoke of places not as virgin jungle, but as ancestral gardens, as managed spaces where their forebears had lived in great numbers. The combination was undeniable. The fertile, human-made soil and the living memory of garden cities formed a powerful clue. The wilderness was not a default state. It was what grew back after a carefully tended landscape was left untended. This meant the population that once lived here had to be far larger, far more organized, and far more permanent than anyone had dared to believe. The myth of the empty Amazon was beginning to dissolve, not with a dramatic collapse, but with the quiet, persistent truth of dark earth and remembered stories. But dark earth and stories could only hint at the shape of what was lost. To truly see the ghost of this civilization, we needed a new way of looking, a vision that could peer through 100 feet of living canopy and see the bones of the earth. That vision arrived with a technology called light detection and ranging, or LiDAR. Think of it as a form of high-tech archaeology from the sky. Mounted on planes or drones, these laser scanners fire millions of invisible pulses of light toward the ground. Each pulse that hits a leaf, a branch, or the soil bounces back, and by measuring its return time, a computer can build a staggeringly precise three-dimensional map of everything below. For an archaeologist standing in the Amazon, it is the ultimate tool. With a few flights, they can digitally strip away every single tree, every vine, every shadow, revealing the ground beneath as if the entire rainforest had simply vanished. What they saw when they first used this technology over sites in places like the Bolivian Amazon was not just a few more mounds, it was a revelation that redefined the word civilization. The LiDAR maps showed a sprawling, engineered landscape. They revealed wide, straight causeways raised high above the seasonal floods, connecting one community to another like ancient highways. They outlined vast geometric platforms, the foundations for large communal buildings and homes. They pinpointed enormous, intricate reservoirs and canals designed for water management. And they showed these features were not random. They were arranged in clear, interconnected clusters like neighborhoods in a vast, green metropolis. This was the irrefutable evidence, a bird's-eye view blueprint of a society that had sculpted its entire world. The empty jungle was an illusion. We had been looking at a forgotten city the whole time. We just never had the eyes to see it. The LiDAR maps gave this lost world a name, the Casarabe culture. From roughly the year 500 to 1400, in what is now the Llanos de Mojos region of Bolivia, a society thrived in a way that shatters every old assumption about life in the Amazon. For centuries, their home was seen as a vast, seasonal wetland, an impossible place to build anything lasting. The truth, now etched in laser light, reveals they were not just surviving, they were engineering a landscape on a breathtaking scale. The heart of this discovery lies in two major urban centers, Cotoca and Landivar. To call them towns would be a profound understatement. These were carefully planned, low-density cities, a form of urban design utterly unique to this environment. Instead of cramming homes tightly together, the Casarabe people spread their residential mounds across a vast, managed territory. Each mound, elevated above the wetlands, supported clusters of homes and gardens, creating a city that was interwoven with the forest itself. But the real genius and the true mark of their ambition was how they connected it all. Radiating out from the civic and ceremonial centers of Cotoca and Landivar were long, perfectly straight causeways, raised highways that ran for miles across the landscape. These were not meandering paths, they were deliberate, engineered routes, often accompanied by parallel canals that managed water flow and likely provided transport. The entire system forms a vast radial network, like spokes on a wheel, with the ceremonial core at its hub. This was a master plan, a testament to social organization and collective labor that rivals the urban planning of contemporary medieval societies across the globe. The Casarabe were not simply living in the Amazon, they had learned to sculpt it, to build a green metropolis where water was a resource to be managed, not an obstacle to be feared. Their world was a testament to harmony between human settlement and a challenging environment, a harmony so complete that when it ended, the forest simply grew back, hiding their masterpiece for centuries. The true genius of this civilization is written not in stone, but in mud and water. In a world without quarries or metal tools, the builders of the Amazon turned to the most abundant materials they had, earth and wood. This was not a limitation, it was a brilliant adaptation. Their entire architectural philosophy was born from a simple, relentless fact of life, the annual flood. For months each year, vast stretches of their homeland would transform into an inland sea. So they did not build to resist the water, they built to rise above it. They constructed monumental earthen platforms, moving staggering amounts of soil by hand to create artificial hills. Some of these platforms reached over 70 feet high, transforming the flat wetland into a terraced landscape of safe, dry ground. Upon these foundations, they erected their homes, their communal buildings, and their ceremonial spaces from wood and thatch, materials that breathed with the forest. But the platforms were just the beginning. To truly live with the water, they became master hydro-engineers. They dug extensive, precise canal systems that snaked through their settlements. These canals served a triple purpose. They were waterways for canoes, turning travel into a smooth, silent journey beneath the canopy. They were managed ecosystems for raising fish, providing a reliable protein source. And they were a drainage network, carefully controlling the flow of the seasonal floods to protect their raised fields and gardens. Connecting it all were those long, straight causeways, elevated roadways often built right beside a canal. This created a transportation grid where one could walk on a dry path or paddle a canoe on a parallel waterway, a network of movement that tied their green metropolis together. This was architecture in profound harmony with its world. They listened to the rhythm of the rainforest, the pulse of its floods, and they built a society that moved to that same beat, a symphony composed in earth and water. Such a vast, engineered landscape could never be the work of a scattered few. The silent causeways and towering mounds are a testament not just to ingenuity, but to numbers, to a social engine of immense power and coordination. To move the volume of earth required for just one of these platform cities would have taken thousands of people working together over generations. This simple, physical fact forces us to completely rethink the population of the ancient Amazon. Where the old story saw a green desert, the new evidence points to a green metropolis. Conservative estimates now suggest that major hubs like Kotoka and their surrounding networks could have supported populations in the tens of thousands. Some researchers, looking at the sheer density of interconnected sites, believe regional populations may have reached into the hundreds of thousands. This was not a wilderness with people in it. This was a cultivated, peopled landscape of a scale that rivals many well-known societies of the medieval world. A population of that size, engaged in projects of that ambition, does not organize itself by accident. The coordination required to plan a straight causeway running for miles, to allocate labor for digging vast canals, and to maintain the social cohesion to see these projects through across decades implies a sophisticated political structure. This challenges one of the most persistent myths about indigenous Amazonian societies, the idea that they were all small, egalitarian, and politically simple tribes. The evidence written into the earth suggests something far more complex. We are likely looking at the footprint of powerful chiefdoms, or what anthropologists sometimes call regional polities, societies with a clear social hierarchy and a centralized authority capable of mobilizing people and resources across a vast territory. Someone had to make the decision to build a ceremonial center exactly here. Someone had to organize the teams to dig that canal there. This indicates leaders with vision, planners with an understanding of hydrology and geometry, and a social contract that convinced thousands to contribute their labor to a communal future. It was a level of political sophistication and collective action that we simply never attributed to this part of the world before. The forest did not just hide cities, it hid kingdoms. But if such a powerful and populous society once thrived here, a haunting question remains: what happened to it? What could cause a civilization capable of bending a continent to its will to simply vanish, leaving only whispers in the soil for us to find centuries later? A civilization of that scale could not survive on foraging alone. Feeding tens of thousands of people in the heart of a rainforest required a food system of equal genius to their architecture, and we now know they possessed exactly that. For decades, the dominant image of ancient Amazonian farming was one of simple slash and burn, a practice where small plots were cleared, farmed briefly, and then abandoned as farmers moved on. This model could never produce the surplus needed to fuel an urban society. The reality, discovered through soil science and plant archaeology, is far more sophisticated. These were master agroforesters, practicing a form of land management so advanced it makes our modern industrial agriculture look blunt and clumsy in comparison. They did not just farm the land, they cultivated the entire forest as a garden. Their method is best described as creating food forests or forest islands. They would selectively enrich patches of the jungle, planting and encouraging a layered canopy of useful species. Imagine walking through a forest that seems wild, but every plant has a purpose. Tall palm trees for fruit and oil, mid-level fruit trees like avocado and cacao, lower shrubs with berries and medicinal leaves, and vines like passion fruit weaving through it all. This was not a monoculture field, it was a living, breathing, self-sustaining supermarket, meticulously designed over generations to be both highly productive and ecologically resilient. This agroforestry system worked in perfect concert with their other innovations. In the deep, fertile terra preta soils they had created, they cultivated staple crops like manioc, a starchy root that could be processed into flour, maize, squash, and sweet potatoes. But they didn't stop there. Along the banks of their vast canal networks, they constructed raised fields, platforms of earth lifted above the water table. These were ingenious, self-watering gardens. The adjacent canals provided consistent moisture, regulated temperature, and the nutrient-rich muck dredged from the canal bottoms served as a perpetual natural fertilizer. Fish swimming in the canals would have provided pest control and additional nutrients. This was a closed-loop, sustainable system of astonishing efficiency. It produced more than enough food to support a non-farming class of engineers, priests, and leaders, allowing for the specialization that defines complex societies. The rainforest was not an obstacle to be cleared, it was a partner to be understood and enhanced. Their greatest monument was not a pyramid of stone, but a thriving, edible landscape, a testament to a profound ecological knowledge that we are only just beginning to comprehend. This deep harmony with their environment makes their ultimate disappearance all the more puzzling and profound. The silent geometry of their cities speaks a language beyond mere engineering. To walk from a residential mound along a straight causeway toward a central plaza was not just a physical journey, it was a spiritual passage. The largest structures in these urban networks, often immense U-shaped platform mounds, were almost certainly ceremonial centers, the beating heart of their cosmology made physical. Their precise orientation was not random. Researchers suggest these alignments may have been carefully calculated to mark celestial events, like the solstices or the path of certain stars, weaving the cycles of the heavens directly into the urban plan. The causeways radiating outward like spokes could have mapped mythological narratives onto the land, tracing the paths of ancestral journeys or connecting the realm of the living with spiritual worlds. This transforms our understanding of their landscape from a collection of useful features into a sacred geography, a vast outdoor temple where every road and reservoir held a double meaning. Water, the defining element of their world, carried profound symbolic weight. The canals and reservoirs that provided food and transportation were also likely conceived as spiritual conduits. In many Amazonian belief systems, rivers are seen as the veins of the earth and as pathways to the underworld, a realm of ancestors and potent spirits. A carefully dug canal, then, might have been understood as a constructed river, a way to channel spiritual energy or facilitate symbolic travel between worlds. A reservoir at the center of a settlement could have represented a cosmological center, a still point connecting the layers of the universe. This intertwining of practical and sacred purpose is key to understanding their society. There was no separation between the engineer and the priest, between civic planning and religious duty. The official who organized the dredging of a canal was likely performing a spiritual act. The community gathering to maintain a ceremonial mound was reinforcing both their social bonds and their connection to the cosmos. Their entire civilization was built on this holistic principle, where daily life, governance, and deep belief were fused into a single, sustainable pattern. This profound harmony makes the silence that followed their era all the more resonant. For a society so deeply attuned to its world, what force could have been powerful enough to sever that connection and cause their green metropolis to be reclaimed by the forest? The answer lies not in a single cataclysm, but in a convergence of challenges that even their remarkable ingenuity could not ultimately withstand. The long causeways were not just ceremonial paths, they were the lifeblood of a regional economy. Picture a merchant centuries ago setting out from the urban center of Kotoka. Their journey did not begin with hacking through dense undergrowth. Instead, they stepped onto a wide, elevated highway, a causeway raised above the wetlands, its surface hard-packed and clear. For mile after straight mile, this road cut through the managed forest, connecting directly to smaller towns, villages, and outposts. This was not a single road but an entire network, a system of trade arteries that bound together a territory spanning hundreds of square miles. The physical effort required to build and maintain these roads tells us their purpose was vital. They were the essential infrastructure for moving not just people, but the goods that sustained an entire civilization. What traveled along these green highways? The evidence comes from the artifacts found far from their source. In settlements deep within this network, archaeologists uncover fine ceramics painted with distinctive styles that originated in the major centers. They find polished stone axes and ceremonial objects made from rock that had to be imported from quarries hundreds of miles away, a feat impossible without organized transport. They find traces of prized materials like vibrant bird feathers from macaws and parrots, jaguar teeth, and special seeds or resins, all items that held both practical and prestige value. This flow of materials reveals a complex exchange system. A satellite village near a good clay deposit might specialize in pottery, sending its wares to the urban core in exchange for finely worked stone tools from the highlands. A community skilled in featherwork or cultivating a particular fruit could trade its specialties for exotic goods from even farther afield. This was more than barter. It was a regional economy that allowed for specialization and created interdependence, tying the fate of a small farming hamlet to the great platform cities. But these roads carried more than physical goods. They were conduits for ideas, beliefs, and news. A potter's new design for a water jar could travel from one settlement to another within a season. A story, a song, or a new method for building a fish weir would flow along these same paths. This constant movement of people and ideas fostered a shared cultural sphere, a common identity that stretched across the wetlands. The style of a ceremonial mound in a distant town would echo the grand platforms of Kotoka, not by coincidence, but because architects and priests traveled and shared knowledge. This connectivity was the true source of resilience for the Casarabe culture. In times of local hardship, perhaps a poor harvest in one area, the network allowed for support to flow in from a more fortunate neighbor. It allowed leaders to coordinate large-scale projects and mobilize labor from across their domain. The causeways transformed what could have been a scattering of isolated, vulnerable communities into a unified and adaptable urban network, a society far greater than the sum of its parts. Their strength was woven into the very landscape, a testament to the power of connection. Yet, this intricate web of exchange and communication also reveals a vulnerability. For a network this complex does not fade quietly. Its end would require a disruption profound enough to sever every one of those carefully maintained links, to silence the traffic on the highways for the last time. The causeways fell silent one season and never echoed with footsteps again. By the time the first Spanish expeditions pushed into the heart of South America in the 16th century, they walked through what they perceived as untouched wilderness. They had no idea they were traversing the overgrown plazas and buried highways of a fallen civilization. The great urban networks of the Casarabe culture were already empty, their monumental platforms cloaked in roots and vines, their canals slowly filling with silt. The forest had not erupted to destroy these cities. It had gently, patiently, grown over them after the society that lovingly maintained them simply faded from the scene. So what happened? What could unravel a social fabric so strong and an infrastructure so resilient? The answer is not a single dramatic event, but likely a cascade of challenges, a perfect storm that even this ingenious culture could not weather. Researchers point to several interconnected possibilities. One major factor may have been a shift in the very climate they had so expertly managed. Their entire world was built on a predictable rhythm of wet and dry seasons. Prolonged droughts, possibly lasting decades, would have been catastrophic. The elaborate canal systems would have run dry, the self-watering raised fields would have cracked under the sun, and the managed forest gardens would have stressed beyond recovery. A society that mastered water would have been brought to its knees by its absence. Their greatest strength could have become their most profound vulnerability. Social and environmental pressures may have also played a role. Maintaining such a vast, interconnected network required constant cooperation and a stable social order. We can speculate that internal conflict, perhaps competition between rising centers or challenges to established leadership, could have fractured that unity. If the social contract that mobilized thousands for communal projects broke down, the infrastructure would have begun to decay almost immediately. Furthermore, while their agroforestry was sustainable, a growing population may have pushed against the limits of their technology, leading to localized overuse of certain resources. But many historians believe the final, decisive blow came from a source the Casarabe could never have anticipated, an invisible enemy that traveled across an ocean they did not know existed. Old-world diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza were biological weapons of mass destruction in the Americas. These illnesses, against which indigenous populations had no natural immunity, are now understood to have often spread far ahead of actual face-to-face European contact, carried along trade routes by intermediaries. It is a haunting thought that the first introduction the Casarabe descendants may have had to the Old World was not a conquistador in armor, but a devastating wave of sickness. The impact would have been apocalyptic. Imagine a population where 90% of the people, perhaps within a single generation, succumbed to illness. The knowledge of how to dredge a specific canal, the ritual to bless a new causeway, the collective memory of celestial alignments for planting, all of that intricate cultural knowledge would have vanished with the elders who held it. A society can survive drought or conflict, but a catastrophe of that scale obliterates the very possibility of continuity. The few survivors, facing a shattered world and unimaginable loss, would have had no choice but to abandon the great urban centers. The monumental tasks of maintenance became impossible overnight. Without teams to clear them, the canals clogged. Without traffic to pack them down, the causeways were breached by roots. The forest, always waiting at the edges, began its slow, quiet reclamation. The cities did not fall in battle or burn. They were simply left behind, their stories fading into the soil from which they were built. This transforms our understanding of the Amazon from a pristine wilderness into a landscape of profound memory, a garden patiently growing over the resting places of a world we are only now learning to see again. The forest never truly forgot the cities that once grew within it. While archaeologists needed lasers to see the past, for many contemporary indigenous peoples of the Amazon, this history has always been a living memory, passed down through stories and etched into the very land they call home. The discovery of the Casarabe cities and others like them is not just a revelation for science, it is a profound validation of deep-time indigenous knowledge. For generations, oral histories have spoken of ancestral places, of great gatherings and gardens now cloaked in jungle. Modern communities often place their villages on the same raised ground, near the same rich black earth, following the same practical wisdom that guided their ancestors. The terra preta soils created centuries ago are still actively sought out and used for farming today, a direct, fertile link to the past. This continuity transforms the entire narrative. This is not a story of a people who vanished without a trace, leaving a blank slate for others to claim. It is a story of incredible resilience, of cultural adaptation in the face of unimaginable hardship. The knowledge of how to live with the forest, how to cultivate it as a garden rather than conquer it as a frontier, did not die out. It was carried forward, reshaped, and preserved. This recognition fundamentally challenges a colonial narrative that has shaped our view of the Americas for 500 years, the idea of terra nullius, or empty land, waiting to be discovered and put to use. The Amazon was never empty. It was a managed, peopled, and profoundly understood landscape. The sophisticated engineering and agroforestry we are only now uncovering with technology represent a legacy of innovation that belongs to the indigenous peoples of the region. Their ancestors were not primitive tribes lost in the wilderness. They were the builders of green metropolises, the master planners of sustainable civilizations. This legacy is not merely historical, it is critically present. In a world grappling with environmental crisis, the enduring indigenous systems of the Amazon offer vital, living lessons. Their practice of cultivating food forests, creating lasting fertile soils, and designing settlements in harmony with water cycles presents a model of sustainability that modern industrial agriculture is only beginning to appreciate. It is a model born not from dominating nature, but from a deep, generational dialogue with it. To look at the rainforest now is to see two layers simultaneously: the vibrant, living world of the present and the ghostly, magnificent imprint of a past that refuses to be silent. The final question then becomes not just what we have found, but what we choose to do with this rediscovered history. How does this rewritten story change our responsibility toward the Amazon and the people who are its living memory? Their story is not an isolated wonder, but part of a much larger global conversation. To truly grasp the significance of these Amazonian cities, we can place them side by side with another world undergoing its own urban transformation during the very same centuries, medieval Europe. From roughly the year 500 to 1400, while towns like Paris, London, and Florence were taking shape behind stone walls, the Casarabe culture was building its own version of urban life a world away. The contrast in their physical forms could not be more striking. A typical medieval European town was a dense, vertical cluster. Stone and timber buildings crowded within protective walls, streets were narrow, and open space was a precious commodity. It was a fortress mentality, a gathering inward for defense and commerce. The Amazonian city, as we now see it, was the opposite, a vast horizontal network. Instead of walls, it had wide causeways. Instead of cramped streets, it had spacious residential mounds set among food forests and interlaced with canals. This was not a fortress, but a garden metropolis, woven into the fabric of the living world rather than separated from it. Yet, for all their physical differences, these societies were solving remarkably similar human challenges. Both were centers of intense craft specialization. In Europe, guilds of weavers, blacksmiths, and masons honed their trades. In the Amazon, master potters developed distinctive regional styles, while others specialized in featherwork, stone tool production, or canal engineering. Both developed clear social hierarchies, with leaders, priests, and planners coordinating the labor of many, and both were hubs of trade that connected far-flung regions. European towns thrived on road and river networks moving wool, wine, and metalwork. The Amazonian cities were nodes in a green highway system, exchanging ceramics, stone, seeds, and ceremonial goods across hundreds of miles. Perhaps the most powerful parallel lies in the sheer scale of their communal ambition. The awe we feel standing before a great medieval cathedral like Notre Dame is rooted in understanding the generations of collective labor it required. That same feeling of awe is warranted when we look at a LiDAR map of a Casarabe platform city, moving millions of cubic feet of earth by hand to create those monumental mounds and causeways. Represents a social and organizational feat every bit as profound as quarrying stone and raising Gothic spires. Both achievements were declarations of faith and identity, projects that bound a community together in a shared, monumental purpose. This comparison does more than just highlight similarities. It dismantles an outdated and harmful hierarchy of civilizations. For too long, the measure of a society's advancement was wrongly based on whether it used stone, metal, or wheels. The discovery in the Amazon proves that complexity and sophistication are not bound to a single toolkit. Here was a civilization that, using earth, wood, and water, achieved a level of urban planning, environmental engineering, and social cohesion that stands as a direct parallel to the Old World. They were not primitive, they were simply different, their genius perfectly adapted to the unique possibilities and constraints of the rainforest. This reveals a world where urban life was not invented once and then copied, but was a brilliant human idea that flowered independently in many forms, from the stone-packed towns of Europe to the garden cities of the Amazon. Recognizing this shared human impulse to build, connect, and create meaning on a grand scale finally allows the true legacy of the Amazon's first builders to take its rightful place on the global stage. The genius of their landscape management extended even to the element we most often fear, fire. To the modern eye, a wildfire is a terrifying force of destruction, but for the builders of the Amazonian cities, fire was a precise and essential tool. Evidence from soil cores and charcoal layers tells a story of small, frequent, and carefully controlled burns. This was not a reckless clearing of land, but a sophisticated practice, almost like a form of horticultural pruning on a grand scale. Imagine a gardener walking through a vast, living garden, using a tiny, focused flame to clear away dead underbrush, to open up space for sunlight to reach young, desirable saplings, and to return nutrients to the soil in the form of mineral-rich ash. This is what they did across their territory. The result was a mosaic landscape, a patchwork quilt of different habitats. There would be open areas for growing staple crops like manioc, sun-drenched orchards of fruit trees, and adjacent sections of managed forest at different stages of growth. This intentional diversity, often called pyrodiversity, created edges and clearings that actually boosted the overall health of the ecosystem. Different plants and animals thrive in different conditions, and by creating a variety of these conditions, they encouraged a wider range of species to flourish. This practice also served a crucial protective function. By regularly removing the buildup of dry leaf litter and deadfall, these controlled burns eliminated the fuel that could feed a catastrophic, uncontrolled wildfire. Their knowledgeable use of fire prevented the very disasters we associate with flames in a forest today. It was a form of ancient climate-smart stewardship, a way of working with natural cycles to create a more productive, resilient, and biodiverse environment. The so-called pristine, monolithic wilderness that later Europeans encountered was, in many places, the direct result of this careful, generations-long management being paused. The forest grew thicker and more uniform not because it was untouched, but because the hands that had so skillfully tended it were no longer there to guide its growth. This understanding transforms fire from a symbol of danger into a symbol of profound knowledge, a technology as vital to their civilization as their canals and causeways. It reveals a society that did not simply occupy a space, but engaged in a continuous, creative dialogue with it, using every tool available to nurture a world in which both people and nature could thrive. This recognition forces us to rethink a powerful idea at the heart of modern environmentalism, the concept of pristine wilderness. For decades, the rallying cry to save the Amazon has been built on the image of an untouched Eden, a perfect, primordial world where humans are only visitors or worse, a destructive force. The discovery of ancient cities and cultivated landscapes reveals that this image is not just incomplete, it is a historical fiction. The Amazon we have been trying to save is not a museum of nature untouched since time began. It is, in a very real sense, a cultural forest. Its incredible biodiversity exists on a foundation shaped by thousands of years of human activity, from the dark earth gardens to the managed fire regimes. This does not in any way justify the rampant deforestation happening today. That is a catastrophic and rapid dismantling of a system, not a continuation of it. Instead, this new history challenges us to build a more nuanced and ultimately more powerful conservation philosophy. If the forest's richness was partly cultivated by human hands in the past, then perhaps the key to its future lies not in keeping people out, but in learning from the kinds of human presence that nurtured it. This shifts the goal from preserving a static, imagined wilderness to sustaining a dynamic, living landscape where people are recognized as part of the ecological equation. The most compelling models for this already exist in the stewardship practices of contemporary indigenous communities. Their deep-time knowledge of agroforestry, controlled burning, and species management represents a direct legacy of the principles that shaped the ancient, biodiverse world we are only now discovering. Conservation, therefore, becomes less about creating human-free zones and more about supporting and learning from these proven, sustainable partnerships between people and place. It suggests that the highest biodiversity might not be found in places where humans have never been, but in places where they have learned, over generations, how to live within the forest as careful, creative gardeners. This is a hopeful and transformative idea that human presence and a thriving natural world are not enemies, but can be powerful, synergistic allies. The lost cities teach us that the greatest legacy we can leave might not be a forest we never entered, but a garden we learned how to tend. A laser map is a breathtaking blueprint, but it cannot tell you what a family ate for dinner. The true narrative of this lost world is being written not from the sky alone, but in the careful union of two visions, the grand, sweeping gaze of technology and the intimate, patient work of hands in the earth. LiDAR gives us the magnificent outline, the city's skeleton revealed in stunning clarity. Yet to understand the life that animated that skeleton, we must return to the oldest and most fundamental method of archaeology, the gentle, meticulous work of excavation. It is this powerful synergy, this dialogue between the macro and the micro, that is finally allowing us to hear the whispers of daily life from 1,000 years ago. Teams of archaeologists, guided by the precise coordinates from the aerial scans, now know exactly where to dig. They set up their grids on the vast earthen platforms, along the edges of the silt-filled canals, and at the crossroads of the great causeways. Here, the story shifts from lines on a map to objects you can hold in your hand. A fragment of pottery, its surface painted with a swirling design specific to a certain time period, becomes a crucial piece of dating evidence. It tells researchers not just that people were here, but when they were here, allowing them to construct a timeline of construction, occupation, and change. The style of that pottery, whether it is a simple cooking pot or a finely decorated ceremonial vessel, speaks volumes about social status and daily ritual. Excavations uncover the tools of their world, polished stone axe heads that felled trees to build their homes, grinding stones for processing manioc into flour, and delicate bone needles that hint at textile work. Perhaps most telling are the food remains, the silent testimony of a meal shared long ago. archaeologists sift the soil to find charred seeds of fruits they cultivated, fish bones from their managed canals, and the remains of animals they hunted or raised. This evidence builds a detailed picture of their diet, their agricultural prowess, and their relationship with the surrounding forest. Each of these small finds is a pixel in a much larger portrait. By combining them, researchers can trace the flow of goods. A piece of obsidian, a volcanic glass not found anywhere near the site, tells a story of long-distance trade networks that reached into the distant Andes. The presence of certain shells or feathers points to exchange with communities in other ecological zones. This micro-level evidence maps the economic and social connections that the LiDAR highways only suggested. In this way, the Grand Causeway on the screen connects directly to the exotic seed found in the soil, proving that the network was alive with movement and exchange. This methodology is a conversation across time and scale. The laser from the sky asks the big question, what is the shape of this place? The trowel in the dirt answers with human detail, who lived here and how did they live? Together, they are weaving a holistic narrative far richer than either could achieve alone. It is a reminder that every great discovery in the 21st century still depends, fundamentally, on the patience to look closely at the ground beneath our feet. The true scale of this discovery lies not just in what we see, but in what remains unseen. The Amazon basin is a continent within a continent, a territory so vast it could swallow the contiguous United States and still have room left over. Against this immense green canvas, our current view is astonishingly narrow. The LiDAR surveys that revealed the Casarabe cities and other networks have scanned less than 1% of the entire basin. We have, in essence, illuminated a single room in a palace of 1,000 chambers. The rest remains in shadow, its secrets held by the dense canopy over Brazil, Colombia, Peru, and beyond. Every time researchers secure funding for a new aerial survey, it is an act of pure potential, a chance to point their technological lantern into another uncharted quadrant and see what glimmers back. Each flight has the potential to reveal another sprawling urban footprint, another network of causeways radiating from a lost civic heart. This staggering possibility forces us to ask a question that reshapes the entire narrative. Are sites like Kotoka and Landivar exceptional jewels, rare and isolated city-states shining in the green dark? Or are they merely the first few pieces of a much grander mosaic, evidence of a cultural and political landscape so interconnected it challenges our very vocabulary for pre-Columbian societies? The current finds feel monumental, yet in the context of the Amazon's sheer size, they might be just the opening chapters. We are reading the prologue of an epic whose full scale we cannot yet fathom. What if these cities were not the peaks of achievement, but regional capitals in a wider world of similar complexity? What if the causeways we've traced for dozens of miles were merely local roads in a system that spanned hundreds? The soil science supports this idea, as patches of fertile terra preta are found scattered across the basin in patterns that suggest widespread, long-term habitation. The emerging picture is not of a few clever societies that beat the odds, but of an entire continent where human ingenuity flourished in forms we are only beginning to recognize. Every undiscovered valley, every unsurveyed plateau, holds the potential to expand this story exponentially. We stand at the edge of a new historical frontier, looking into a green vastness that we now know is not empty, but patiently waiting to tell its story. The mystery is no longer if more is hidden, but how much grander the hidden world will turn out to be. The silent canals and causeways are more than archaeological wonders. They are a message in a bottle from the past, carrying a blueprint for our own future. In an era defined by climate uncertainty, the engineering solutions of these Amazonian cities feel not ancient, but strikingly urgent and modern. Their entire civilization was built on a foundational principle we are now desperately trying to relearn: resilience. They did not fight their environment, they listened to it and designed systems to work with its natural rhythms. Take their masterful relationship with water. Living in a landscape that swung dramatically between heavy floods and seasonal dryness, they became experts in capture, storage, and distribution. Their networks of canals and reservoirs were not just for transport or fish, they were a sophisticated hydrological buffer. During the rains, these systems would slow and direct the floodwaters, preventing erosion and filling their reservoirs. In the drier months, that stored water would sustain their crops in the raised fields and maintain the health of their food forests. This is resilience thinking in its purest form, designing a society to absorb shock and adapt to change. A lesson of immense value as many regions today face increasingly unpredictable cycles of drought and deluge. Their approach to food is perhaps their most profound legacy. The agroforestry systems they perfected, those layered gardens of fruit trees, palms, and medicinal plants, were models of sustainability that modern industrial agriculture is only beginning to study with awe. These were not monoculture farms that stripped the land. They were biodiverse, carbon-sequestering engines of life. By enriching the soil with terra preta, a practice that locks carbon away for centuries, and by cultivating a permanent canopy of trees, they actively pulled carbon from the atmosphere while feeding their population. This system was self-renewing, pest-resistant, and incredibly productive over the long term. It created a habitat, not just a harvest, in a world grappling with how to feed billions without destroying ecosystems. This ancient model offers a powerful alternative vision, one where agriculture enhances the environment rather than depleting it. Studying these adaptations moves beyond historical curiosity into the realm of practical inspiration. For engineers and urban planners working in tropical regions today, these cities are a case study in passive, ecological design. They show how to build with local materials, how to use topography for natural drainage, and how to integrate green space as a fundamental component of urban infrastructure, not just an afterthought. Their low-density, garden city model presents a compelling alternative to the concrete sprawl that often defines modern development in sensitive biomass. The lesson is clear. It is entirely possible to create prosperous, populous societies within delicate ecosystems without destroying the very foundations that support life. The Amazonian builders did not see a choice between human progress and natural preservation. They saw them as one and the same project. Their world thrived for centuries because their concept of progress was rooted in balance and renewal. As we face the monumental task of building a sustainable future for our own planet, their forgotten cities rise from the past not as ruins, but as guides, reminding us that the most advanced technology we possess may not be a new invention, but an old wisdom, patiently waiting in the soil for us to remember. The exact moment a hearth went cold tells a story all its own. To move beyond the awe of these city plans and understand their true history, archaeologists must answer a deceptively simple question: when? Pinpointing the timeline of this civilization is like trying to listen for the faint echoes of a specific conversation in a vast, silent hall. The tools for this task are both ingenious and deeply rooted in the physical world they left behind. One of the most trusted methods is radiocarbon dating. When the builders of these platforms lit a cooking fire, the charcoal left behind became a tiny chemical time capsule. All living things absorb a radioactive form of carbon from the atmosphere. When they die, that absorption stops, and the radioactive carbon begins to decay at a steady, measurable rate. By analyzing a fragment of ancient charcoal from a hearth or a piece of wood used in construction, scientists can calculate how long ago that tree stopped living, giving a remarkably precise date for when that fire burned or that post was set. But what about the earthworks themselves, the tons of soil moved to create those monumental mounds? For that, researchers turn to another fascinating technique called optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL. This method works on minerals like quartz, which are everywhere in the soil. These tiny grains naturally trap energy from background radiation over time. When they are buried, shielded from sunlight, that energy builds up. But when ancient builders dug a pit to get soil for a platform, they exposed those grains to sunlight, effectively resetting their energy clock to zero. The moment they shoveled that soil into place, burying the grains again, the clock started ticking once more. In a lab, scientists can carefully expose a sample to light, causing the trapped energy to be released as a faint glow or luminescence. By measuring the intensity of that glow, they can determine how long those grains have been buried since that last moment of sunlight, dating the very act of construction itself. The story these scientific whispers tell is one of astonishing endurance. Current data points to a major era of building and expansion stretching from roughly the year 500 to 1400 of the Common Era. This was not a brief flash of activity. It represents a sustained creative period spanning 900 years, a timeline that comfortably encloses the entire stretch of the European Middle Ages, from the fall of Rome to the dawn of the Renaissance. While Europe saw the rise of castles and cathedrals across the Atlantic, an entirely different form of urban civilization was reaching its own magnificent peak. Some sites show evidence of even earlier roots, suggesting a long period of gradual development, a slow accumulation of knowledge that made the grand projects of the peak era possible. This long chronology transforms our understanding completely. These were not temporary encampments that briefly flourished. They represent a deep, generational commitment to place. A causeway built in the year 800 might have been maintained and traveled by the grandchildren of its original engineers. A ceremonial platform raised in the year 1100 could have been the center of community life for 20 generations. This established timeline does more than just mark dates on a chart. It frames their entire narrative. It gives weight to their decline, suggesting it was not a sudden, violent collapse, but likely a slower transformation or unraveling over decades or even centuries, a gradual fading as complex pressures mounted. Knowing when they thrived allows us to ask the next, more human question: what was daily life actually like for the people who called these garden cities home? A broken piece of pottery can tell a story that a grand causeway cannot. In the quiet corners of an excavation square, far from the sweeping view of LiDAR maps, archaeologists find the intimate artifacts of daily life. These are the objects that were held, used, and cherished by individuals, the tangible echo of a community's rhythm. Among the most common and telling finds are the ceramics. Not all pottery was created equal. Simple, sturdy cooking pots blackened by centuries of hearth fires speak of family meals and the daily task of nourishment. But alongside these utilitarian vessels are others of breathtaking artistry. Elaborately decorated urns and bowls, often found in ceremonial areas or as offerings, display a sophisticated visual language. Their surfaces are adorned with intricate geometric patterns, interlocking spirals, and stylized representations of animals like serpents, jaguars, and local birds. These were not random decorations. Each motif likely carried deep symbolic meaning, perhaps relating to clan identities, spiritual beliefs, or myths about the origins of the world. To hold such a vessel was to connect with a story far larger than oneself. The tools found in these ancient homes reveal the practical genius that supported their grand vision. A polished stone axe head, its edge still sharp after 1,000 years, is a testament to the woodworking that built their world. With such tools, they felled the trees for their thatched homes, shaped the posts for their ceremonial structures, and perhaps even carved the canoes that plied their canals. Nearby, a heavy grinding stone, its surface worn smooth and concave from years of use, tells another essential story. Residue analysis often reveals traces of maize or corn, proving its role as a vital staple. The daily grind of grain into flour was likely a central task, a rhythmic sound that would have filled their settlements, transforming hard kernels into the basis for breads and porridges that fed families and fueled the laborers who moved mountains of earth. Personal adornment adds a layer of individuality and social texture to this picture. Scattered among the household debris are ornaments that once added beauty and meaning to daily life. Pendants and beads crafted from gleaming shells brought from distant rivers, polished animal bones carved into delicate shapes, and even occasional fragments of semi-precious stones like quartz or jadate, traded over vast distances. These were not merely decorations. In many societies, such items signaled age, achievement, clan affiliation, or social standing. A particularly fine shell necklace or a rare stone pendant might have marked a respected elder, a skilled artisan, or a person of spiritual importance. The care taken in their creation and the choice to wear them speaks of a culture that valued identity, aesthetics, and the human desire to signify one's place in the community. Together, these humble objects form a mosaic far more personal than any map. The grinding stone is the hand of a parent preparing the day's food. The painted pot is the creativity of an artist encoding belief into clay. The shell pendant is the pride of an individual moving through a bustling plaza. They are the quiet, persistent proof that the monumental earthworks were not built by an abstract force, but by a society of individuals with homes, families, tastes, and traditions. This material culture gives a human face to the civilization, transforming it from an engineering marvel into a lived experience. It allows us to glimpse not just the scale of what they built, but the texture of how they lived within it. Yet, to understand the full scope of their world, we must look beyond the objects they made and consider the very environment they inhabited. What did their managed landscape actually look like from the ground? And how did their daily reality shape and was shaped by the incredible biodiversity that surrounded them? The endurance of their society makes its eventual silence all the more profound. To understand how such a resilient network could fade, we must move beyond the search for a single dramatic cause. Historians and archaeologists now piece together a more nuanced story, one where several challenges converged into a perfect storm that even this ingenious culture could not weather. It was likely a cascade of pressures, each one weakening the structure until the final, decisive blow fell. The first of these pressures may have come from the very climate they had so expertly managed. Their entire civilization was built on a predictable rhythm of wet and dry seasons. But what if that rhythm faltered? Evidence from ice cores and lake sediments across the Americas suggests that around the time of their decline, the region may have entered a prolonged period of severe drought. For a society whose lifeblood was water, this would have been catastrophic. Their intricate canal systems would have run dry, their self-watering raised fields would have baked under an unrelenting sun, and their carefully tended forest gardens would have withered. The food surpluses that supported their artisans and leaders would have vanished, leading to scarcity and hunger. This environmental stress would have placed immense pressure on the social fabric. The shared purpose that mobilized thousands to dredge a canal or maintain a causeway becomes harder to sustain when people are worried about their next meal. We can envision how competition for the remaining fertile land and reliable water sources might have sparked tensions between different communities or factions within the society. The cooperation that built the network could have frayed into conflict as groups turned inward to protect their own dwindling resources. This internal strain, however severe, was something a society of their depth might have survived or adapted to over time. But then came an enemy they could never have foreseen, one that traveled along the very trade routes that were their greatest strength. Decades before the first European explorer ever set foot in their territory, invisible passengers arrived. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, against which the indigenous populations of the Americas had no natural immunity, are now understood to have spread like wildfire along established trade networks. These illnesses moved faster than people, often leaping from community to community through intermediaries. The impact on a densely connected population like theirs would have been apocalyptic. We are not talking about a bad flu season. We are speaking of catastrophic loss where in a matter of years, a vast majority of a community could be lost to illness. The societal collapse would have been immediate and total. The elder who knew the ritual to bless the new planting, the engineer who understood how to adjust the canal gates after a dry year, the leader who could organize a work crew, that irreplaceable knowledge died with them. The few survivors, facing unimaginable grief and a shattered world, would have had no capacity to maintain the monumental infrastructure. Without teams to clear them, the canals silted up in a single season. Without traffic to compact them, the causeways were breached by roots. The social order that kept the forest at bay dissolved overnight. The wilderness did not aggressively conquer their cities. It simply, patiently, grew back after the hands that tended it were gone. This multi-causal model transforms their end from a mystery into a poignant human story. It was not a failure of their design, but a convergence of external shocks too great for any society of that era to withstand. Their legacy, therefore, is not one of collapse, but of a brilliant equilibrium maintained for centuries, until forces from a globalizing world they never knew reached into their garden and changed everything. The legend of El Dorado is one of history's most powerful and destructive fantasies. For generations of European explorers, it was a siren song of a city paved with gold, a shimmering mirage that drew them deeper into the heart of the Amazon. This quest, driven by greed and a profound misunderstanding of the continent, led to immense hardship and conflict. Yet, in a staggering twist of historical irony, they were right about one thing. There were great, wealthy civilizations hidden in the jungle. They just had no idea what that wealth actually looked like. The cities we are now discovering were a different kind of El Dorado entirely. Their riches were not measured in ingots or jewels, but in something far more enduring, profound knowledge. Their wealth was a mastery of ecology, a genius for organization, and a sustainable way of life that flourished for centuries. The gold the conquistadors dreamed of may have had a faint, real echo. Some researchers suggest the legend could have been born from glimpses of trade goods, golden ornaments that traveled from the high civilizations of the Andes down the river networks to these lowland cities. In the hands of a Casarabe leader, a polished gold pendant would have been a symbol of spiritual power and far-reaching connections, not monetary currency. Or perhaps El Dorado was always a metaphor, a story told by indigenous peoples about the prosperity and sophistication of their inland neighbors, a story the Europeans heard and fatally misunderstood. They marched through a managed landscape, a civilization of earth and water, and saw only a trackless wilderness to be conquered. They stood on the shoulders of a giant and thought they were on empty ground. The real treasure, a model for how to live in balance with a vast and vital ecosystem, was invisible to them because they were looking for the wrong kind of shine. Their failure of vision is a lesson that echoes into our own time, reminding us that the most valuable resources are not always the ones we can easily take, but the ones we must learn to see and understand. This new map of the past demands new textbooks. For over a century, the story of civilization in the Americas was taught with two primary chapters. In the north, there was Mesoamerica, home to the Maya and the Aztecs with their towering pyramids and intricate calendars. To the south, the Andes gave rise to the Inca Empire and its predecessors, masters of mountain roads and stonework. These were the recognized cradles, the twin poles of pre-Columbian complexity. The vast Amazon basin between them was relegated to a footnote, a blank space on the historical map where it was assumed nothing of similar scale could ever emerge. The discovery of these ancient garden cities shatters that simple, two-part framework. we must now add a third, distinct cradle of civilization, one born not in arid highlands or seasonal forests, but in the heart of the world's greatest tropical wetland. This is not a minor addition, it is a fundamental rewrite. It forces us to see the Americas not as a land with two bright spots of genius, but as a continent simmering with independent innovation from the Arctic to the Patagonia. The Amazonian achievement stands apart not as a poor imitation of its neighbors, but as a brilliant, parallel invention of urban life. Their monumental platforms were not copies of Andean temples. They were unique answers to a unique environment, proving that the human impulse to build complex societies could flower in profoundly different forms. This directly challenges old diffusionist theories, which suggested that all advanced ideas in South America trickled down from the sophisticated cultures of the Andes. The timeline itself disproves this. While the Inca Empire was reaching its zenith in the 15th century, the great Amazonian networks had already been thriving for nearly 1,000 years. They were not receiving ideas from the mountains, they were generating their own in a continuous, centuries-long dialogue with the rainforest. Their genius for hydraulic engineering, earth-moving, and agroforestry represents a wholly indigenous tropical science developed in place through generations of deep observation and experimentation. This recognition does more than fill a gap in an old map. It fundamentally elevates the historical and cultural legacy of the entire Amazon basin and its peoples. It places the ancestors of contemporary indigenous communities at the very forefront of a monumental human achievement, the creation of sustainable, populous societies in one of the planet's most challenging and vital environments. Their story is no longer a sidebar about simple tribes. It is a central chapter in the global human saga of adaptation and innovation. To understand the full breadth of pre-Columbian America, we must now look with equal reverence to the stone citadels of the Andes, the celestial observatories of the Maya, and the green, garden metropolises of the Amazon. This expanded view fosters a more nuanced and deeply respectful understanding of the past, one that honors the incredible diversity of ways our species has learned to build a home in this world. The ground holds more than artifacts, it holds the memory of a living people. As the pace of discovery accelerates, a crucial question emerges: who does this history belong to? These sprawling earthworks are not merely academic puzzles or tourist destinations waiting to be uncovered. They are the ancestral homes, the cultural heartlands of contemporary indigenous communities. The laser maps reveal a past, but the present-day guardians of the forest carry its legacy in their stories, their traditions, and their deep connection to the land. This reality places a profound ethical responsibility at the center of every new survey and excavation. The old model of archaeology, where outside experts would arrive, extract knowledge and objects, and depart, is not just outdated here, it is actively harmful. In its place must come a practice built on genuine partnership and respect. This means involving indigenous communities from the very beginning of a research project, not as hired guides or laborers, but as co-investigators and knowledge holders. Their oral histories are not quaint folklore to be filed away. They are vital research data that can guide scientists to significant sites and provide context that soil samples alone never could. A community elder's understanding of why a certain tree grows only on a particular mound, or the local name for a winding stream that once was a canal, can unlock meanings invisible on a digital map. This collaborative approach ensures the research benefits the people most connected to its outcomes, whether through training, shared stewardship of findings, or projects that support community goals. But with great discovery comes great risk. The precise coordinates of a newly mapped city are a treasure map with two very different sets of readers. For archaeologists, they are a research opportunity. For looters, they are a target. The illegal trade in artifacts is a destructive force that ravages cultural heritage worldwide, tearing objects from their context and erasing the stories they carry. Revealing a site's location without robust protection can invite this kind of plunder, where pits are dug indiscriminately, structures are damaged, and sacred items are sold on the black market, forever separated from their meaning. There is also the threat of unwanted development, as roads, farms, or resource extraction projects could encroach on these fragile landscapes once they are publicly known. Therefore, a major part of ethical archaeology today involves strategic silence, knowing when to publish details and when to protect sensitive information in consultation with local communities. The goal is to tell the story of these cities in a way that empowers rather than exploits. This narrative has immense power. It can be a tool for indigenous groups to assert their land rights, demonstrating a continuous, deep-rooted presence and a historical claim to territory that is often under pressure. It can bolster cultural pride and educational initiatives within communities, reconnecting younger generations with the scale of their ancestors' achievements. Ultimately, the uncovering of this past must contribute to the future, strengthening the guardians who have protected the Amazon for generations, and ensuring that this rediscovered wonder is preserved not as a relic behind glass, but as a living part of a cultural landscape. The true measure of this discovery's success will not be in academic papers alone, but in whether it helps secure a thriving, sustainable home for the descendants of the very people who built these garden metropolises. The silent earthworks we have just begun to map are only the starting point. The true revolution in understanding this lost world is just beginning, and the tools of the next decade promise to transform our black and white blueprint into a living, breathing portrait. The key to this future is accessibility. Where once aerial LiDAR surveys required expensive, specially equipped planes, the technology is rapidly shrinking. The next wave of discovery will be driven by fleets of nimble drones, buzzing beneath the canopy, scanning valleys and ridges too remote or too costly for traditional methods. This democratization of vision means researchers can survey vast new territories with unprecedented speed and flexibility, turning the 1% of the basin we have seen into 10, then 20, then more. Each flight is a potential revelation, a chance to add another piece to a puzzle whose full size we still do not know. But seeing the shape of a city is not the same as hearing its heartbeat. To reconstruct the daily rhythm of life within those earthworks, scientists are turning to the very soil itself. Advanced soil chemistry can now detect microscopic traces of ancient activity, phosphates from food waste, lipids from cooking oils, isotopes that reveal what people ate and even where they sourced their water. Paleoecologists analyze ancient pollen, spores, and phytoliths, the tiny silica skeletons of plants, to reconstruct the exact composition of the cultivated forest gardens that surrounded each home. We will move from knowing they had gardens to knowing precisely which fruits ripened in which season, which medicinal herbs grew by the doorway, and how the landscape changed from neighborhood to neighborhood. The story of their food is also a story of their journey. Genetic studies of ancient plant remains, like charred seeds or starch grains on a grinding stone, can trace the lineage of their crops. This could reveal epic sagas of domestication, showing how they transformed wild forest plants into reliable staples over generations. And while deeply sensitive and guided by strict ethical protocols, the potential study of ancient human DNA from carefully protected sites could one day help map family lineages, social structures, and the incredible journeys that connected people across this vast green continent. Perhaps the most profound synthesis will come from artificial intelligence. The LiDAR maps we now analyze by hand contain millions of data points, subtle patterns a human eye might miss. Trained algorithms could scan this digital terrain automatically, flagging the faint signature of a buried causeway, the geometric outline of a forgotten plaza, or the telltale cluster of residential mounds, accelerating discovery exponentially. The ultimate goal is integration. Imagine weaving all these threads, the drone maps, the soil chemistry, the plant genetics, the artifact distributions into a single dynamic model. This would not be a static map, but a four-dimensional simulation. We could watch a city grow over centuries, see its canals expand, observe its trade networks pulse with activity, and model how it might have responded to a prolonged drought. We could test theories about social organization by simulating the movement of people and goods. This is the future of this field, moving from archaeology to a form of digital resurrection. It is a future where we do not just study a lost civilization. We can begin with profound respect and rigorous science to step inside it, to understand not just what they built, but how they thought, adapted, and experienced their world. This is no longer about finding lost cities. It is about learning how to listen to them. The silent cities beneath the canopy are a mirror held up to our own assumptions. For centuries, we looked at the Amazon and saw only a wilderness, a place apart from the grand narrative of human achievement. We were wrong. This discovery is not merely an update to a history book. It is a profound lesson in humility. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that our vision of the past has been limited, shaped by our own cultural biases about what civilization should look like. We searched for stone and missed the earth. We looked for conquest and overlooked cultivation. The true revelation here is not just about the Amazon. It is about the flexibility and brilliance of the human spirit itself, proving that ingenuity can blossom in the most unexpected places, in forms we must learn to recognize. This story rewrites a deeper conflict, the supposed battle between nature and civilization. The Casarabe culture and their contemporaries did not see a jungle to be tamed, but a partner to be understood. Their causeways and canals were not acts of domination. They were acts of conversation, a sustained dialogue with the water, the soil, and the seasons. They built a world where the forest was not cleared away, but invited into the city, where food production enhanced biodiversity rather than destroying it. In an age where we often frame our relationship with the planet as a zero-sum struggle, their legacy offers a powerful alternative, a model of partnership that created abundance for both people and the ecosystem for nearly 1,000 years. It is a testament to a different kind of progress, one measured not in the subjugation of the land, but in the harmony achieved with it. Every laser pulse that maps a lost causeway is a reminder that history is not a finished story. It is a living manuscript filled with hidden chapters waiting for the right moment to be read. For generations, this chapter was written only in terra preta and oral tradition, invisible to the tools and perspectives of the outside world. It took the open mind to question an old dogma and the right technology, LiDAR, to give those whispers a visible form. This should inspire a quiet awe in all of us, for it suggests that the ground beneath our feet, in so many places we think we know, may hold stories we have not yet dreamed of. Our understanding of the human journey is still being written, and its most surprising paragraphs are likely still buried, waiting for our curiosity to find them. As we stand at the threshold of even greater discoveries, with drones and artificial intelligence poised to scan the vast, unseen 99% of the basin, let this story change how you see the world. Look at a dense forest, a sweeping grassland, or a silent desert, and wonder not what is absent but what might be hidden. Question the long-held assumptions that shape your view of history and progress. Most importantly, respect the deep, shaping hand of humanity on our planet's long story. A hand that can build as often as it can destroy, that can cultivate as skillfully as it can consume. The lost cities of the Amazon are a gift from the past, a blueprint for resilience and a call to humility. They remind us that sometimes the most advanced path forward is to rediscover an ancient wisdom, patiently waiting in the soil for us to remember. If this journey into the green heart of a forgotten world has captivated you, there are countless more mysteries waiting to be explored. Let us know which ancient civilization you would like to uncover next.